Live from Philadelphia for the Money Show, I'm Adrian Manns. I'm here today with Lyn Alder Schwartzer. She is of FA Trader and interested in hearing your opinion about value investing right now. Where do you see money going, or where do you think people should be putting their money?
Sure. So over the past 12 years, we've been in a cycle where growth stocks have been outperforming value stocks. Even though if you look back 40 years, value stocks have outperformed growth stocks, but they kind of go through cycles. And we've had this very large divergence of performance, and I'm starting to see a ton of opportunity in the value space, both in the US and then potentially to an even greater extent internationally, because we've had this big period where US stocks have outperformed most foreign stocks, and whereas a lot of people chase performance that have just occurred,
right,
it's best to look where what is beaten down.
So where do you see, let's say domestically, what sectors do you see as providing the greatest opportunity right now?
A few different areas. One is, for example, I just did a series on retail because that's been a really beaten down area, and sometimes the baby's thrown out with the bathwater, so you have a lot of low quality companies selling off, but you've also had some higher quality ones selling off. So for example, I've looked at Kohl's, and I think that's a pretty good opportunity. As a small position, I find these kind of lower, like anything with a strong balance sheet, pretty good dividend, that kind of has a plan for how to deal with the changing environment.
So Kohl's sort of multi-line retail outfits, yeah. What about internationally? Is there a different space you're looking at in terms of sector performance?
Not sectors, but more like regions. So for example, I'm finding a ton of opportunity in emerging markets, particularly ones that are more financially fortified, because people often lump emerging markets together as though they're all kind of the same type of, but there's over a dozen different major emerging markets and then tons of smaller ones, and sometimes they couldn't be more different. So there's ones that have very weak currencies, ones that have very strong currencies, ones that are very fast growing, ones that are slower growing like Russia, and we're at a point now where they're actually some of the cheapest they ever have been relative to US stocks, because we have this very large period of underperformance for them. And then in addition, the strong dollar is really hurting a lot of emerging markets, but there's always potential that the dollar could weaken and we'd have this resurgence in emerging markets. So I think it's useful to have some exposure.
Okay, and what do you think in terms of all the geopolitical risk right now? Do you think there's, what's sort of the balance that you would tell somebody or advise somebody to have between international investments and domestic investments, or do you not watch the news? Do you not look at the?
I look at the news, but one of the ways to reduce risk is to kind of be everywhere, so that if because risk can happen here in the U.S. too. We've had a lot of stability in the past decade, but we're also one of the most highly valued markets in the world right now, because we've kind of been we're one of the fastest growing developed markets compared to like Japan and Europe, and we've been more stable than the emerging markets. But historically, whatever areas do the best in one decade often do some of the worst in the next decade. We've kind of flipped back and forth historically, so we're starting from a pretty high peak at this point. So I generally recommend a pretty globally diversified approach, and to not invest too much in any one country. How much to put in emerging markets or international markets really depends on your risk profile, what you feel comfortable with. So there's no one answer, but I generally encourage at least having some.
Okay, and if someone wants to follow your thoughts on the markets, where do they find you?
So I'm a contributing analyst to FA Trader. Okay. So we have a couple different experts that all come together on this premium forum to approach the market. So we have economists. I cover international and value stocks. We have a biotech expert, an energy expert, a couple different areas to all kind of come together to see where we can find value. And I also write at lynalden.com.
All right, fantastic. Thank you, Lyn. So for the Money Show, live from Philadelphia, I'm Adrian Manns.